The Inca civilization, rise and mighty organization. In the 14th century, one of the greatest pre-Columbian civilizations in the Americas, the Inca Empire, embarked on an impressive journey of expansion. Spreading across the majestic Andes mountain range, this kingdom quickly became an undeniable powerhouse. By the early decades of the 16th century, the land the Inca proudly called Tawantinsuyu, or the Land of the Four Corners, firmly controlled a vast stretch of South America's western coast. It was the largest empire, surpassing any other political entity on the continent in both scale and influence at the time. At its core, the Inca Empire was an absolute monarchy, headed by a leader revered as divine, the Sapa Inca. His power was supreme, every command was beyond question. Under the Sapa Inca's rule, the empire was divided into 4 main administrative regions, which is where its Four Corners moniker came from. The administrative system was incredibly sophisticated and intricate, with a vast network of officials, nobility, and bureaucrats working seamlessly to maintain order and control over a sprawling, diverse territory. The Inca Empire wasn't just a politically unified entity, it was also a rich tapestry of different peoples. The Inca conquered and assimilated dozens of various tribes, leading to an incredibly diverse linguistic landscape with over 30 dialects spoken throughout their domain. To maintain cohesion and control over this diversity, the empire developed a refined and effective military machine. The foundation of this military might lay in its strict conscription system, where warriors were recruited from the very peoples they had conquered. Every male within the empire aged 25 to 50 was liable for military service, while those under 25 were often mobilized as porters, ensuring a steady supply of food and equipment for campaigns. While these conscripted soldiers spent most of their time engaged in agriculture, that didn't diminish their fighting capabilities. The Inca had implemented a basic combat training program for most males in their empire, ensuring that a ready reserve military force was always available when needed. Armies were organized in a hierarchical structure, from small units of 10 men expanding into 100, 1,000, and finally, massive armies up to 10,000 strong. Each unit was led by experienced native officers. The equipment of Inca soldiers varied quite a bit, reflecting the origins and fighting traditions of different regions. Various ethnic groups brought their unique combat styles to the battlefield. For instance, Highland troops were renowned for their skillful use of slings and bolas, a weapon made of 2 or 3 stones tightly bound with cord that could be thrown to trip or strike down enemies. In contrast, warriors from coastal areas often preferred spears for throwing and thrusting. In the eastern lands, the bow was a popular ranged weapon. These long-range weapons were typically used to weaken the enemy before engaging in brutal hand-to-hand combat. In close quarters, the Inca primarily relied on wooden clubs and maces. Mace heads were often crafted from stone or metal, most commonly copper or bronze, and usually featured a star-shaped pattern with sharp prongs. This design concentrated the force of impact into a small area, inflicting immense damage with each blow. Occasionally, these mace heads were even stylized to resemble animal heads, carrying both symbolic meaning and intimidating an opponent. To protect themselves on the battlefield, the Inca army also paid close attention to defensive gear. Warriors wore helmets made from wool, cane, and sometimes reinforced with metal. Quilted woolen body armor, along with wooden or quilted shields, helped minimize damage from attacks. These protective items were often lavishly decorated with bright colors, feathers, and other markings that held deep cultural and religious significance. The sight of the Inca army marching into battle, estimated at a staggering 200,000 strong, created a colorful parade of impending death, making a powerful impression of both their scale and majesty. The fateful encounter, Pizarro and the Unthinkable collapse. So, how did a small force of fewer than 200 men manage to defeat such a mighty empire? The answer lies in the fateful encounter with Francisco Pizarro. In the 1520s, Pizarro led expeditions along the western coast of South America, becoming the first Europeans to bring news of the great Inca Empire back to the Old World. Inspired by his distant cousin, Hernán Cortés, who famously conquered the Aztec Empire, Pizarro went directly to Charles V, the King of Spain and Holy Roman Emperor. With his persuasive rhetoric, Pizarro convinced the emperor of the immense potential for wealth that conquering such an empire would bring. Consequently, he was tasked with bringing the lands south of Panama under Spanish rule. Of course, the Spanish crown would receive a 20% cut of whatever riches were acquired or stolen, depending on your perspective. With this new imperative, Pizarro set sail in December 1530 from Spain for Panama, and the following January, he embarked for Colombia. His initial force consisted of just 180 conquistadors, conquerors, and 37 horses. Though they were later joined by reinforcements, Pizarro's total army, intended to overwhelm the mighty Inca Empire, reached a surprisingly small 260 men. Yet, facing such overwhelming odds didn't deter Pizarro. He didn't earn his place in history by giving up. So, this tiny army slowly crept southward. They moved at a snail's pace, making their first contact with the Inca in April 1532. It wasn't until November of that year that Pizarro finally had his direct meeting with Inca Emperor Atahualpa in the town of Cajamarca. Initially, the Inca weren't particularly impressed with these strange newcomers or their small contingent. Nevertheless, they were polite, and both sides exchanged pleasantries, agreeing to meet again the next day in the nearby town square of Cajamarca. Pizarro and his men quickly occupied the town first, awaiting Atahualpa's arrival. The Inca emperor arrived with his personal bodyguard, a symbolic force of about 3,000 to 4,000 men, most of whom were unarmed, while his main army of 80,000 remained camped outside the town. At that moment, the Spanish had a total of 168 men, which included a small cavalry force and a few arquebuses and light artillery. Pizarro, with his audacious mindset, viewed being outnumbered nearly 500 to 1 as favorable odds. He ordered his men to hide in a nearby courtyard and patiently waited for Atahualpa to show up, which he did in grand style. The Sapa Inca was carried on a magnificent litter by strong warriors, surrounded by attendants adorned in glittering gold, silver, and precious stones, a sight that made the Spaniards practically salivate over their immense wealth. As soon as Atahualpa arrived, Pizarro sent an emissary to speak with him, demanding that the emperor submit to the Catholic Church and the authority of Charles V. The emissary also handed Atahualpa a Bible. Atahualpa, not understanding its significance, scornfully threw it aside. Pizarro immediately seized this as justification to attack, with the resounding battle cry of "Santiago!" The Spanish burst from their hiding places, opening fire with their arquebuses as the cavalry and infantry charged simultaneously. The Inca, having never seen firearms before, were utterly stunned by the sudden thunderous noise and plumes of smoke. Even more terrifying were the half-ton beasts these invaders rode, moving faster than any person could run. Panic spread rapidly through the Inca ranks, and many began to flee, trampling over one another as the Spanish cavalry rode them down. Meanwhile, the infantry, in the words of one witness, made so good an assault that in a short time most of them were put to the sword. Pizarro was in the thick of the action, driving directly towards Atahualpa, who was still on his litter. He tried to pull the Inca ruler off, but Atahualpa was too high up for a decent grip. Instead, Pizarro and other conquistadors began slaughtering the litter-bearers holding it up. As soon as one fell, another Inca warrior immediately took his place, as letting the divine Sapa Inca fall to the ground was unthinkable. Finally, a squadron of cavalry charged the litter, causing it to topple, and Atahualpa was captured. With their leader taken, any remaining resistance dissolved like smoke. When all was said and done, approximately 7,000 Inca lay dead, with only a single Spanish casualty. Atahualpa was taken hostage, and Pizarro demanded that a room be filled with gold and silver in exchange for the emperor's freedom. This ransom was indeed paid, but Atahualpa was subsequently accused of plotting against the Spanish and was executed by strangulation. With the death of their ruler, the Spanish were able to march into Cusco, the empire's capital, unopposed, thereby establishing Spanish control over the Inca Empire. However, rebellions and guerrilla warfare would continue to plague the region for many decades afterward. The decisive factors in the collapse: a perfect storm. So how did a tiny force of fewer than 200 conquistadors manage to obliterate an army orders of magnitude larger and topple the greatest empire in the New World? Several factors converged, creating a perfect storm that led to this rapid collapse: deception and the element of surprise. The Inca were virtually unarmed when they arrived in Cajamarca and completely unprepared for an ambush. During the battle, the Spanish had only a handful of arquebuses, which were slow-firing and inaccurate. However, the loud bang and thick plume of smoke when these guns were fired undoubtedly caused utter terror among the Inca, who had never witnessed such weapons. The terrifying power of cavalry. Spanish cavalry played an extremely significant role in sowing fear. A cavalry charge is terrifying enough for people familiar with horses. For the Inca, whose largest beast of burden was the llama, the sheer horror induced by these massive horses cannot be overstated. Superior weaponry and steel armor. The Incas' stone and bronze weapons, while capable of inflicting damage, were nearly useless against the solid steel breastplates and helmets worn by the conquistadors. The Incas' woven body armor also proved no match for the sharp steel swords of the Spanish. The invisible epidemic catastrophe. The Spanish also carried a deadly weapon they were unaware of: disease. A few years before Pizarro's arrival, a devastating epidemic, likely smallpox, had erupted, wiping out an estimated 2/3 to 90% of the Inca population. This very epidemic killed the Sapa Inca in 1528. triggering a brutal civil war for power between Atahualpa and his brother. When the Spanish arrived, Atahualpa was in control, but had not yet fully consolidated his grip over the empire after this devastating internal conflict. The belief system and the Sapa Inca's sacred status. Furthermore, the Inca belief system held the Sapa Inca as a sacred, inviolable divine figure. Therefore, when Atahualpa was threatened, whether on the battlefield at Cajamarca or later as a hostage, no Inca dared to do anything that might possibly endanger his life, even when such action would have been prudent and necessary to save the empire. This unfortunate combination of deception, superior military technology, the devastating impact of disease, and the constraints of their belief system led to the mighty Inca Empire's unbelievable collapse before an army small enough to easily fit into a modern college lecture hall.